G'day, welcome to Olympus 35mm user-based, quasi-empirical, cheap and cheerful videos on Olympus 35mm cameras. And today I would like to share with you a plastic half frame wonder, in fact the last of the Olympus models in half frame to come out. But before I do, I'd like to give you a little bit of history about the fixed focus pens. In 1959, the manual focus, manual exposure pen came out, and Yoshihisa Matani, who was the designer of the original pen, actually saw a woman take a photograph of a baby with the pen and realised that she was going to get a terrible photograph out of it. She hadn't focused it, she wasn't looking at the exposure, she just basically pressed the button. So he thought about it and he came up with the idea of the simple pen EE. And how did he do that? Well, he and his design team. Well, they started off with a selenium meter around the outside of the lens to handle all the exposure. And then they grabbed a 4-element, 3-group, 28mm f3.5 lens, fixed focus. The idea was anything from 5 feet to infinity, you were done. It was all you needed to do. And so this became a very, very popular model. It had 3 iterations of it. The Pen EE came out in 1961. The Pen EE2 came out in 1968. So this one had a 7-year run. And another 6 years later, the Pen EE3 came out in 1973. Now, the only, as far as I know, the only real difference between them was some cosmetic changes, plus this had no hot or cold shoe. The EE2 came out with a hot shoe. The EE3, I'm not too sure whether it was any mechanical differences or not, or whether it was just cosmetic. They went from a green type of leatherette to going back to the black leatherette, which you see here, but just with a different stamped pattern on it. So anyway, that's the Pen EE. So what happened after the Pen EE3? Well, in 1981, 20 years after the Pen EE first came out, the Pen EF came out. And there was the same concept. It was supposed to be a very, very simple camera, no thinking needed. In fact, it's still, as far as I know, it's still exactly the same 28mm f3.5 lens. It still has a selenium meter around the outside, but there's a few improvements. For starters, it's lighter. It's a plastic body. It's only about 280 grams. It's roughly about the same size, a little bit bigger, but that was to incorporate the built-in flash and the AA battery, which powered it. However, it's still the same, but better. I must admit, I don't find it as much fun to use as the EE2 that I have, mainly because I really like the feel of the EE2. It feels great in the hand. This is a lovely little camera. It takes just as good photographs, but it's got that plasticky feel to it, which doesn't give you as much tactile feel in my mind. Anyway, it's that beautiful piece of engineering that is the EE2. However, nonetheless, this is a very, very nice little camera to use. Very, very comfortable. It has the selenium cell gives you programmed exposure from f3.5 at a 30th of a second right up to a 250th of a second at f22. 1.4 meters to infinity fixed focusing, and the flash will run at ASA 100 or ISO 100 between 1.5 meters and 2.8 meters, and at 400 ASA 1.5 meters to 5.6 meters. That's the best you're going to get out of it. Very simply turned on, the flash pops out a little bit to get that little bit further away from the lens to help with the red eye. About 7 seconds later, there's a little indication on the top that lights up to say that your flash is charged, and it recharges in about 7 seconds, depending on what sort of battery you put in there and how well it's charged. Turn the flash off, just close him up. So you can, if you want to, you can use a fill-in flash with it. In fact, you don't need the flash at all. You don't need the battery at all. There's a little battery cover there which has the AA size battery in there. If you're only taking daytime photographs, then the flash and the battery that powers the flash is then unnecessary. Not a real lot to be said outside of that. That's ISO 25 through to 400, and that's just adjusted through the ring on the front. 43.5mm filters are accepted, and of course, because the selenium cell is there, any compensation that's required for the filters is covered by the exposure meter as well, which is very, very clever. Bar finder lines and parallax error marks, there is nothing in the viewfinder, with the exception of if your conditions are so dark that a 30th of a second at f3.5 isn't good enough, the camera will actually lock the shutter and a little red flag will appear, which is quite handy, so you can't take photographs outside of the conditions that the selenium meter can actually cope with. It has a tripod socket, rewind button on the bottom. I've shown you the battery cover. The top gives you the flash indication, ready indication, a rewind lever, a film counter, obviously the shutter button. The shutter button you can put a cable release in if you wish. The front has the flash on-off switch, or actually on switch, and you close it up to turn it off, and your ISO dial changer. The side has a single lug for a wrist strap, so you're really pretty stuck. You can't sort of hold it in this position with a neck strap. If you had a neck strap, you'd have to set it up like so. The viewfinder, as with all half-frame cameras, or all the ones that I know anyway, is in a portrait orientation, which makes it really handy for street shooting. And if I just take a photograph, you'll hear that it's actually fairly quiet. So it's not a bad little street shooter. You know, certainly in the noise of a city, you wouldn't even notice it. And it's a point and shoot, so people don't really pay any attention to it. Okay, so that's the Pen EF for you. A nice little shooter. I can thoroughly recommend any of the pens. The fixed focus pens are even more fun and simple to use than some of the other models. Certainly an excellent alternative, as far as I'm concerned, to the Lomo toy cameras that are out there. I think you actually get better results, and you have the bonus of having with a half frame in-camera diptychs, where when you scan the full 35mm sort of size, it basically gives you two photographs, so you can tell a mini story in camera. Sure, I know you could do it in Photoshop, but it's a bit more fun sometimes doing it in camera. So the Pen EF 1981 wonder, last of the half frame cameras for Olympus, probably commands a little bit more money than what it's really worth, but nonetheless, none of these things generally, except for the very, very rare models, are particularly expensive anyway. So I can't quite remember. I think I picked this one up for about $80 from Japan. So I much would have rather 50, but you know, $80 isn't, you know, too much out of the ballpark anyway. So that's your lot for today. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.